A boarding pass is a key. For some, it unlocks a vacation. For others, a business deal. For Maya Washington, a 22-year-old woman with eyes that held the quiet fire of fierce intelligence, it was the key to a future she had only dared to dream of. It was a first-class ticket to Chicago, not for luxury, but for necessity. In her portfolio case, clutched with a grip that belied her calm exterior, were the blueprints and renderings for the final round of the prestigious Atwood Architectural Fellowship, a prize that promised a full scholarship for her master's degree and an apprenticeship with a legendary firm. She was an orphan from the south side of Chicago, raised by a grandmother who taught her that dignity was the one possession no one could take from you. Today, she was flying home to claim her destiny, but standing at the threshold of the Ethereum Lounge at LAX, an exclusive sanctuary reserved for the airline's most elite clientele, she was about to learn that some doors, even when unlocked, are guarded by dragons of petty prejudice. In the hushed, climate-controlled world of premium travel, one person's judgment can build a wall higher than any skyscraper. What happens when a woman of vision is seen not for her potential, but for the color of her skin? And what happens when the man with the power to shatter her dreams is the one man who desperately needs the very thing she possesses? The Ethereum Lounge was designed to be an oasis of tranquility. Soft jazz whispered from hidden speakers, the air smelled of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso, and the lighting was a warm, honeyed gold. It was a world away from the frantic energy of the main terminal. Maya had been granted access by the Fellowship Committee, a gesture meant to allow her a quiet space to prepare. She found a small, secluded armchair overlooking the tarmac, the afternoon sun glinting off the wings of colossal jets. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the thrill of it all. This was the world she was fighting to enter, a world of elegance, design, and influence. She carefully unzipped her portfolio, her fingers tracing the clean lines of her final design. A community arts center for her old neighborhood, a structure of glass and reclaimed timber that was both beautiful and functional. It was more than a building. It was a love letter to the place that had raised her, and a testament to the belief that beauty should not be a luxury. She had poured every ounce of her talent, every sleepless night, into these pages. She was so absorbed in her work, reviewing every detail with the meticulous focus that was her hallmark, that she didn't immediately notice the woman approaching her. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she was the manager of the Ethereum Lounge. A woman in her late 40s, with a severe haircut and a mouth permanently set in a thin line of disapproval, Eleanor moved through her domain with the air of a minor monarch. She believed in order, exclusivity, and the unwritten rules of class, and as she looked at Maya Washington, she saw a violation of all three. She saw a young black woman, dressed simply in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, sitting in a lounge where CEOs and celebrities paid thousands for the privilege. She saw a portfolio case that looked worn at the edges, and a look of intense concentration that, to Eleanor's jaded eyes, seemed out of place. She didn't see a prodigy. She saw a problem. "May I help you?" Eleanor's voice was smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel. It was the kind of voice that could make a perfectly valid ticket feel like a forgery. Maya looked up, startled. "Oh, no, thank you. I'm fine." She offered a polite smile. Eleanor's eyes flickered down to the portfolio spread across the small table. "That's quite a bit of paperwork. This is a space for relaxation, not for work." "I'm sorry," Maya said, beginning to gather her drawings. "I'm a finalist for the Atwood Fellowship. The committee arranged for my access. I'm just doing a final review before my flight." She spoke the words with a touch of pride, hoping the name of the prestigious fellowship would clarify her right to be there. It had the opposite effect. Eleanor's suspicion hardened into certainty. The Atwood Fellowship was a world-renowned prize. The idea that this girl, this child, could be a finalist struck her as preposterous. She must have scammed her way in, or perhaps she was an assistant, sent to hold a seat for her important employer. "The Atwood Fellowship," Eleanor repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "How impressive. We do, however, have a dress code, and your belongings are taking up quite a bit of space." Maya looked down at her attire. It was simple, professional, and immaculate. She looked around at men in wrinkled golf shirts and women in designer tracksuits. The dress code was a lie, a weapon being fashioned specifically for her. A familiar, weary feeling began to settle in her stomach. It was the exhaustion of having to constantly justify her existence in spaces where others moved without a second thought. "My apologies," Maya said, her voice remaining steady. She carefully placed her drawings back into the portfolio and zipped it shut, placing it neatly on the floor beside her chair. "Is this better?" Eleanor wasn't satisfied. The girl's composure irritated her. She had expected a flustered apology, a hasty retreat. This quiet dignity felt like a challenge. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again, and the documentation proving your eligibility for lounge access." This was a deliberate escalation. Her pass had been scanned and approved at the entrance. To ask for it again was an act of overt suspicion. With a slow, deliberate calm, Maya reached into her bag, retrieved her ticket and the official letter from the fellowship committee, and handed them over. Eleanor examined the documents under the light, as if searching for watermarks on counterfeit currency. She scanned the letter, her eyes narrowing. "Anyone can print a letter," she murmured, just loud enough for Maya to hear. She tapped at the computer terminal behind the nearby service desk. "I'm not seeing the proper authorization code entered for your access. Perhaps you could try again?" Maya suggested, her own patience beginning to fray. "The name is Washington. Maya Washington." "I know your name," Eleanor snapped, "and I know procedure, and my system says you do not belong here." The declaration was made. The battle line was drawn. From a discreet corner of the lounge, a man watched the exchange with growing irritation. Julian Croft, the reclusive 38-year-old tech billionaire who had acquired this airline in a hostile takeover 6 months prior, was doing one of his infamous undercover tours. Dressed in a simple grey Henley and worn jeans, he looked more like a roadie for a rock band than the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He hated these tours, but his board insisted they were good for optics. His father, a legendary architect, had taught him that a structure's integrity is determined by its hidden joints and foundations. Julian applied the same principle to his businesses. He wanted to see the airline's hidden joints, and what he was seeing now was a crack in the foundation. Initially, he'd seen the young woman spread her papers out and had felt a flicker of annoyance. He valued the lounge for its quiet, but then he saw the manager, Eleanor, descend like a hawk. He recognized the type: employees who confused authority with power, who got a thrill from enforcing rules that didn't exist. His first instinct was to let it play out. It was a customer service issue, a minor blip. He had bigger problems to solve: fuel hedging strategies, union negotiations, a fleet-wide Wi-Fi upgrade that was billions over budget. He watched as the young woman, Maya, remained impossibly calm. He saw her hand over her documents. He saw Eleanor's sneering disbelief. He couldn't hear their words, but he could read the body language. It was a scene he'd witnessed in 1,000 different forms, the powerful preying on the perceived weak. He sighed, ready to discreetly text his assistant to have the situation handled, when something about the young woman's drawings caught his eye. From his angle, he could only see a corner of one of the blueprints she was putting away, but the drafting style, the clean, confident lines, the elegant notation, was hauntingly familiar. It reminded him of his father's early sketches. The thought was absurd, a random flicker of sentimentality. He dismissed it and returned to his emails, the minor drama already fading from his mind. The situation at the service desk was deteriorating. Eleanor, emboldened by Maya's refusal to crumble, decided to make a public example of her. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the lounge," Eleanor said, her voice now loud enough to turn heads. Several nearby patrons lowered their newspapers, their faces a mixture of curiosity and annoyance at the disturbance. "On what grounds?" Maya asked, her voice low but unwavering. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "Don't you ever let them see you sweat, child. Your dignity is your shield." "On the grounds that you are not authorized to be here," Eleanor declared, placing the letter and boarding pass on the counter, just out of Maya's reach. "This lounge is for our paying first-class passengers and verified guests. You are, as far as I can tell, neither." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. She was being called a liar and a fraud in a room full of the city's elite. Maya felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up her neck, but she forced it down. "I am a guest of the Atwood Fellowship," Maya repeated, enunciating each word with precision. "My flight is in 2 hours. I have a valid, paid-for, first-class ticket. You have seen the proof. If there is an issue with your system, I suggest you call the airline's corporate liaison, or perhaps the Fellowship Committee directly. Their number is on the letterhead." This was a mistake. By offering a logical solution, Maya had inadvertently challenged Eleanor's authority, exposing her incompetence. For Eleanor, this was no longer about procedure, it was about winning. "I don't need to call anyone," she sneered. "My job is to maintain the security and exclusivity of this lounge, and you, young lady, are a security risk." She gestured to a burly security guard standing near the entrance. "Frank, we have a situation here." The guard, a man named Frank, who moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who preferred to avoid conflict, ambled over. "What's the problem, Ms. Vance?" "This individual has gained unauthorized access and is refusing to leave," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with self-righteous authority. "She needs to be escorted out." Frank looked from his imperious boss to the slender young woman who stood straight and defiant. He saw her well-kept clothes, her intelligent eyes, and the expensive portfolio at her feet. This didn't look like a trespasser. "Mum," he said to Maya, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Maybe it's best if you just come with me. We can sort this out outside." "I will not be sorted out outside," Maya said, her voice shaking slightly with the effort of control. "I have done nothing wrong. I am being harassed by this woman for reasons I can only assume are based on prejudice." The word prejudice was a lit match in the tense air of the lounge. Eleanor gasped theatrically. "How dare you? I am treating you the same way I would treat anyone attempting to defraud this airline. Frank, remove her. Now." Frank hesitated. He was caught between his boss's command and his own gut feeling that this was wrong. He reached out a hand, not to grab Maya, but to gently touch her elbow. "Please, miss, don't make this difficult." "Get your hand off me," Maya said, stepping back. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the hushed silence that had fallen over the room. The confrontation had finally captured Julian Croft's full attention. He put his phone away. This was no longer a minor customer service issue. This was an abuse of power happening in his lounge, on his watch. He stood up, a thundercloud of anger gathering on his face. He started to move towards them, but before he could take more than 2 steps, the situation escalated with sickening speed. Eleanor, furious at the guard's hesitation and Maya's defiance, made a fatal error in judgment. She reached across the counter, snatched Maya's boarding pass, and with a single, vicious tear, ripped it in 2. "There," she spat, tossing the pieces onto the counter. "Now you have no ticket. You are officially trespassing. Get her out of here." The sound of the tearing paper was like a slap in the face. For Maya, it was the breaking point. That ripped ticket wasn't just a piece of paper. It was her future, her dream, her one shot at escaping the life that had been laid out for her. The calm facade she had so carefully maintained shattered. "You had no right to do that," she cried out, her voice filled with a pain that was deeper than anger. In her distress, she lunged forward, not at Eleanor, but to try and retrieve the torn halves of her ticket. Frank, the security guard, misinterpreted the movement. Reacting to Eleanor's shrill command and Maya's sudden lunge, his training took over. He grabbed Maya's arm, his grip firm and unyielding. "That's enough," he barked. "You're coming with me." Maya struggled against his grip, a desperate, panicked motion. "Let go of me. My portfolio." In the scuffle, her portfolio case was knocked from the table. It crashed to the floor, the latches springing open. Her life's work, the pristine blueprints, the vibrant renderings, the culmination of a year of relentless effort, spilled out across the plush carpet in a chaotic, heartbreaking mess. A collective gasp went through the lounge. The sight of the beautiful drawings scattered on the floor, some being trampled under the guard's heavy boots, was a visceral image of destruction. It was the desecration of something pure. "Look what you've done," Maya sobbed, her fight draining away, replaced by a wave of utter despair as she saw a muddy footprint smeared across the facade of her dream building. "Serves you right," Eleanor muttered, her face a mask of cold triumph. She had won. She had broken the defiant girl. Frank began to drag the now limp Maya towards the exit, his partner, another guard, moving to help him. They were manhandling her, pulling her past the silent, staring faces of the lounge's patrons. Humiliation washed over Maya in a scalding wave. They were treating her like a criminal, parading her shame for all to see. It was in that moment of absolute degradation, as she was being hauled past a grand, fluted column of polished black marble near the entrance, that her mind, a repository of architectural detail, latched onto one last, desperate fact. It was a detail she had noticed upon entering, an obscure design signature she had studied in textbooks. Julian Croft was now striding towards them, his face a mask of cold fury. "What in God's name is going on here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the silence and stopped the guards in their tracks. Eleanor turned, her expression of triumph faltering as she saw the rage in the eyes of the man she'd dismissed as a scruffy nobody. "Sir, this is a restricted area. This woman was causing a disturbance." But Maya wasn't looking at Eleanor. She was looking at Julian, though she had no idea who he was. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice, when she spoke, was strangely clear, imbued with the last ounce of her shattered dignity. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact, a final, defiant assertion of the knowledge they couldn't take from her. To be assaulted and thrown out of a room that features a classic, Croft-inverted corbel, she said, her voice shaking but precise, as she gestured with her head towards the marble column. A flawed one at that. The chamfer is off by at least 3 degrees. His son would be ashamed. The words struck Julian Croft like a physical blow. Time seemed to stop. The guards paused, their hands still on Maya. Eleanor stared, confused by the strange technical jargon. But Julian Croft had gone completely still, his face pale with shock. The Croft inverted corbel was not just a design feature. It was a secret signature his father, the celebrated architect Marcus Croft, had hidden in a handful of his final projects. It was an inside joke, a piece of structural artistry that was almost invisible to the untrained eye. And the flaw, the 3-degree miscalculation in the chamfer of this specific column at the LAX lounge, was a secret known to only 2 living people, Julian himself and the master stonemason who had carved it 20 years ago. His father had discovered the flaw after installation and, in a fit of pique, had left it as a monument to the fallibility of perfection. He had told Julian the story 100 times. His son would be ashamed. It was a phrase his father had used, lamenting that Julian had chosen the cold logic of code over the artistry of concrete and steel. For this young woman, in the midst of her deepest humiliation, to not only identify the obscure feature, but to pinpoint its secret flaw, was impossible. It was like a stranger whispering a secret from his childhood dreams. In that instant, everything shifted. Julian's perception of the scene inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. This was not a trespasser. This was not a fraud. This was someone who saw the world with the same eyes as his father. The familiarity of her drafting style suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't just similar. It was a clear homage to his father's work. His fury, which had been a simmering anger at a breakdown in customer service, transformed into something cold, personal, and absolute. They hadn't just assaulted a passenger. They had desecrated a temple, and they had done it to an acolyte. "Let her go," Julian said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried an authority that was more potent than any shout. The guards, sensing the seismic shift in power, instantly released Maya's arms. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the very column she had just identified. Julian walked past the guards as if they were statues. He knelt down amidst the scattered drawings on the floor, his movements gentle, reverent. He picked up the main rendering, the one with the muddy footprint. He stared at the design, the elegant sweep of the roofline, the innovative use of public space, the sheer, unadulterated talent. It was brilliant. It was visionary. He looked up at Maya, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and profound apology. "Marcus Croft was my father," he said softly. "My name is Julian Croft. I own this airline, and I believe you are owed the most profound apology of my lifetime." Eleanor Vance's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, mottled white. The scruffy man in the Henley shirt was Julian Croft, the phantom CEO whose picture she had only seen once in a corporate newsletter. The realization crashed down on her with the force of a physical impact. She had not just harassed a passenger. She had performed her petty tyranny in front of the one man who held her entire existence in his hands. Mr. Croft," she stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. I had no idea. There was a misunderstanding with her ticket. She became belligerent. The lies sounded thin and desperate even to her own ears. Julian rose to his full height, the soiled rendering held carefully in his hand. He turned to face her, and his eyes were like chips of ice. The casual annoyance was gone, replaced by a surgical, terrifying rage. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Let me see if I understand, Miss Vance. You saw a young black woman, a guest of the Atwood Fellowship, and you decided she didn't belong. You ignored her documentation. You accused her of fraud. You refused to follow her very logical suggestion to verify her credentials. You then destroyed her travel document, an act, I might add, that is a federal offense. Then you ordered my security staff to physically assault her, and in the process, you damaged what I can only assume is the project that could define her entire career. Is that the misunderstanding you're referring to? Each sentence was a hammer blow, dismantling her defense piece by piece. He wasn't just angry, he was dissecting her actions with cold, irrefutable logic. I was following procedure, Eleanor whispered, her last pathetic shield. Procedure? Julian let out a short, brutal laugh that had no humor in it. Show me the procedure, Ms. Vance. Show me the page in the employee handbook that says, profile, harass, and assault passengers based on your own bigoted assumptions. Because I've read that handbook. I wrote half of it. That page doesn't exist. He took a step closer, and she flinched. What exists, however, is a zero-tolerance policy for this exact behavior. A policy it seems you have chosen to ignore. He turned his attention to the two security guards, who were now trying to shrink into the wallpaper. And you too, he said, his voice dropping even further. Your job is de-escalation. It is to protect our passengers, not to act as the personal muscle for a manager on a power trip. You laid hands on this woman. You saw her work being destroyed and you did nothing. Give me your names and badge numbers. Frank, the older guard, mumbled his name, his face ashen. The younger guard looked like he was about to be physically ill. Julian turned back to Eleanor, who was now visibly trembling. You have not just failed at your job, Ms. Vance. You have become a liability of such magnitude that your continued presence on this property puts my entire company at risk. You are a walking lawsuit. But more than that, you are a stain on the memory of the man who designed this room. He paused, letting the weight of his words crush her. You're fired. Not suspended. Not under review. Fired. Effective this second. Your airport credentials will be deactivated before you reach the door. Frank and his partner will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Then they will escort you off the premises. After that, they will report to airport administration, where they will be suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation. If I ever see your face on any of my properties again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. The sentence was delivered. It was swift, total, and absolute. Eleanor Vance stood there, stripped of her power, her authority, her career, all in the space of 2 minutes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was no longer a monarch in her petty kingdom. She was just a woman who had made a terrible, life-altering mistake. Julian didn't give her a second glance. He turned his back on her, a final, dismissive gesture. His attention was now solely on Maya, who stood watching the scene unfold with a stunned, disbelieving expression. He knelt again and began to carefully gather the rest of her scattered drawings, treating each page with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. I am so sorry, he said again, his voice now gentle, filled with a raw sincerity that cut through the shock. This never should have happened. My airline, my employees. We failed you. I failed you. He stacked the drawings neatly and handed them to her. He then looked at the torn halves of her boarding pass, still lying on the counter. He picked them up, a muscle working in his jaw. He turned to his personal assistant, a sharp woman named Chloe who had appeared silo. The silence that followed Julian Croft's decree was a vacuum, pulling all the air and sound from the Ethereum lounge. It was a dense, heavy quiet, punctuated only by the distant, disembodied announcements for other flights, other lives. Maya stood by the flawed marble column, her hand resting against its cool, unyielding surface, feeling as though it were the only thing holding her upright. The world had just been disassembled and reassembled around her in the space of 5 minutes, and she was still trying to understand the shape of the new reality. Chloe, Julian's assistant, moved with the frictionless efficiency of a ghost. She was a whisper in the ear of a senior gate agent, a blur of fingers on a tablet, a quiet confirmation. The torn halves of Maya's boarding pass, the artifacts of her humiliation, were taken away like evidence from a crime scene. Julian himself knelt, his movements still imbued with that shocking reverence, gathering her drawings. He didn't stack them haphazardly. He aligned the edges, his brow furrowed in concentration, treating each sheet of vellum as if it were a sacred text. He held the portfolio out to her, not the drawings themselves. He was returning her vessel, her shield. Maya took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm. Her own was ice-cold, her hands trembling with the backlash of adrenaline. She clutched the portfolio to her chest, a familiar weight that was now the only anchor in a sea of vertigo. "This way," Julian said, his voice softer now, meant only for her. The walk to the gate was not a triumphant procession. It was a slow, agonizing passage through a gallery of staring eyes. The other passengers in the lounge, once a jury of silent accusers, now watched with a different kind of intensity. Awe, perhaps, or fear. They parted for them, a human sea receding from the shore. Maya kept her eyes fixed on the grey industrial carpet, counting the seams. She felt naked, exposed. Every person they passed knew her story, or a version of it. They had witnessed her degradation, and now they were witnessing her strange, unbelievable salvation. It felt like being the star of a play she had never auditioned for. The shame had not vanished. It had simply changed its flavor. On the jet bridge, the enclosed space amplified the sound of their footsteps and the low hum of the idling engines. The air smelled of jet fuel and ozone. It was here, away from the prying eyes, that a single, hot tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. Julian stopped just before the aircraft door. "Ms. Washington." "Maya," he began, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't pass. "I know words are inadequate. But what happened back there was a fundamental betrayal of everything this company is supposed to stand for. It was a betrayal of my father's legacy. It was a betrayal of you." She looked up at him then, really looked. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were filled with a profound and weary guilt. He wasn't just a CEO performing damage control. He was a son reckoning with a tarnished inheritance, and in his gaze she saw the reflection of her own exhaustion. "It wasn't the first time," she said, her voice barely a whisper, the words tasting like rust in her mouth. It was just the loudest. The simple truth of her statement seemed to land on him with a physical weight. His shoulders slumped slightly. He nodded, a slow, pained acknowledgement. "I can't undo the others," he said, "but I will burn down the system that allowed this one to happen." Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was an oasis of hushed leather and polished chrome. The flight attendants, their faces a carefully composed blend of deference and concern, greeted her by name. She was led to seat 1A, a throne she had never sought. As she sank into the supple leather, the sheer kinetic whiplash of the day threatened to overwhelm her. 1 hour ago she was a finalist, filled with nervous hope. 30 minutes ago she was a trespasser, a fraud. 10 minutes ago she was a victim, being manhandled towards an exit. Now what was she? Julian took the seat across the aisle, giving her space. Chloe was in 1B, already on her laptop, her expression that of a general commanding a silent war. The cabin door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, shutting out the world. As the plane pushed back, the engines spooling up with a deep, resonant whine, Maya felt a profound sense of dislocation. She was moving forward, being propelled toward her destiny in Chicago, but her spirit was still back on the floor of that lounge, scattered and trampled along with her drawings. For the first 20 minutes of the flight, they sat in silence. The attendants offered her champagne, warm towels, a menu bound in leather. She refused it all, accepting only a bottle of water, which she held in her lap, her knuckles white. She watched the sprawling, glittering grid of Los Angeles shrink below them, the city lights a fractured constellation. She tried to think about her presentation, to run through the key points in her mind. But the words wouldn't come. All she could hear was the rip of paper. All she could feel was the guard's grip on her arm. Finally, Julian broke the silence. "My father was a bastard to work for," he said, his voice quiet, drawing her gaze from the window. "A perfectionist, a tyrant. He would fire a contractor if a joint was a millimeter off. He believed that beauty was a moral imperative, and that mediocrity was a sin. He designed buildings that were meant to last for centuries, monuments of glass and steel. But he was terrible at understanding the people inside them." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped between his knees. "I went the other way. I chose code, binary, clean, logical systems. I thought people were the messy variable you could control with better data, with more efficient processes. I bought this airline because it was a broken system, and I thought I could fix it. I've spent a year focused on fuel efficiency, on-time performance, baggage handling algorithms. I was trying to perfect the machine." He looked directly at her, his expression raw. "I never once considered the ghosts in it, the biases, the prejudices, the petty cruelties that no algorithm can account for. What you said. His son would be ashamed. You were right, but not because of the flawed Corbell. He would be ashamed because I built a beautiful, efficient machine that forgot how to be human." Maya listened, the water bottle cold against her palms. His confession was disarming. It wasn't an excuse, it was an autopsy. She found her voice, and it was steadier than she expected. "Why do you think the Corbel is flawed?" she asked. The question surprised him. "The stonemason miscalculated the chamfer. It's off by 3 degrees. My father was furious when he found it." "No," Maya said, shaking her head gently. "That's not it. Architecturally, it's perfect. The math is sound. The flaw isn't in the stone." She paused, gathering her thoughts, the familiar language of her craft a comfort. "The flaw is in the placement. It's a signature of profound artistry, hidden in a room designed for transient traffic, built on a foundation of exclusion. It's a beautiful secret, told in a language no one in the room was meant to understand. That's the flaw, a masterpiece that can't be seen." Julian stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. The hum of the engines seemed to fade away. In that moment, the power dynamic between them vanished. They were no longer CEO and wronged passenger. They were two people speaking the same secret language, the language of Marcus Croft, the language of intent and structure, and the soul of a space. A slow, sad smile touched Julian's lips. "He would have loved you," he said, and the words were heavy with a grief that felt fresh. "You see things the way he did. Only clearer." That was the key. The conversation that followed, that spanned the 4-hour flight to Chicago, was not about the incident. It was not about lawsuits or corporate restructuring. It was about seeing. Maya, hesitant at first, then with a growing, fierce passion, finally opened her portfolio. With Chloe discreetly creating a privacy shield around them, she spread the drawings across the wide table that folded out between their seats. The muddy footprint on the main rendering was a brutal scar, but she didn't hide it. It was part of the story now. She walked him through her design for the Southside Community Arts Center. She explained how the main atrium was designed to capture the morning light, a concept she called an architecture of optimism. She showed him how the reclaimed timber from a demolished local factory was not just a sustainable choice, but a way to weave the neighborhood's history into its future. She described the acoustics of the performance space, the quiet intimacy of the reading nooks, the open-plan studios designed to foster collaboration. "A building isn't a fortress," she explained, her voice gaining strength with every word. "It's a conversation. It should ask you to come in, not dare you to enter. The Ethereum Lounge, it's a monologue. It speaks of wealth and power, but it doesn't listen. It has no curiosity. That's why it's so easy for someone like Eleanor Vance to thrive there. The space itself is her accomplice." Julian listened, utterly enthralled. He was not just seeing brilliant architecture. He was seeing a philosophy, a way of looking at the world that he had dismissed as sentimental nonsense. He was seeing the part of his father he had never understood, filtered through a lens of profound empathy. He saw that Maya didn't just design structures, she designed dignity. As the plane began its descent into Chicago, the lights of a different city sprawling below, Julian made his decision. Chloe had already confirmed that Maya's presentation was rescheduled for the next afternoon, and that a specialist from the Art Institute was on standby to restore her renderings. "When I was a kid," Julian said, his eyes on the city lights, "my father took me to the construction site of one of his towers. I was complaining about something, I don't remember what. He picked up a piece of rebar and a shard of broken glass from the ground. He handed them to me and said, 'The world will always give you scrap metal and broken things. A fool complains about the mess. An artist builds with it.' For the past year, I've been complaining about the mess." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "I have a proposition for you, Maya, and I want you to understand this is not born from pity or guilt. This is the most logical, calculated business decision I have made all year. The Atwood Fellowship is a wonderful prize. You will win it tomorrow, I have no doubt. But it's a stepping stone. I want to offer you a foundation. I don't want to hire you as a consultant to redecorate a room. I want to create a new position for you as Chief Architectural Advisor for the entire Croft Transport Group. I want you to take your philosophy of empathy in design and bake it into the DNA of this company. The lounges, the gate areas, the cabin interiors, the training academies. I want you to help me build something that lasts. I want you to help me build with the broken pieces." Maya felt the breath leave her body. It was an offer so far beyond the scope of her dreams that it felt like a fantasy. An hour ago, her future was a torn piece of paper. Now it was an empire. But she remembered her grandmother's voice, cool and steady. "Never take the first offer, child, and never let a man's apology feel like a debt you have to repay." "I'm an architecture student," she said, her voice even. "I have a master's degree to complete. I have a community arts center I intend to see built on the South Side. My career path doesn't run through a corporate boardroom." "I know," Julian said, without missing a beat. "The position will be structured around your life, not the other way around. We will fully fund the fellowship so you can hire a project manager for your arts center while you study. We will provide the resources. All I ask for is your vision, your voice, your refusal to accept a flawed foundation." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, the roar of the reverse thrusters a sudden, violent intrusion. They had arrived. Home. "I will need to think about it," Maya said. And in her quiet, firm tone, Julian Croft heard not the voice of a student, but the voice of a partner. 1 year later, Maya stood in the center of the new Ethereum lounge at LAX. The air was different. It smelled of fresh lemon, white tea, and old books. Sunlight, softened by angled wooden louvers, streamed in from the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting shifting patterns on the warm oak floors. The furniture was a mix of deep, comfortable armchairs, arranged in conversational clusters, and sleek, private pods for working. The walls were not beige, but a deep, calming blue, and they were covered not with corporate art, but with a rotating exhibit from emerging LA artists. It was a space that breathed. She walked over to the black marble column. It remained a silent witness. The floor was still there, but now it was a feature. A single, museum-quality spotlight illuminated the subtle error in the chamfer. At its base, a small brass plaque was set into the floor. It didn't mention Julian's father by name. It simply read, "Perfection is a myth. Integrity is a choice." It feels quiet. Julian had come to stand beside her. He looked different, too. The exhaustion was still there, but it was the satisfying weariness of hard work, not the hollow fatigue of a man at war with his own creation. "It's the materials," Maya said, running her hand along the column. "The wood absorbs sound. The textiles are natural. We designed the acoustics to mimic a library, not a train station. People whisper here, not because they're intimidated, but because it feels like a place for thought." Her first 6 months had been a brutal education in corporate inertia. There were budget fights, skeptical vice presidents who saw her ideas as expensive follies, and endless presentations to justify every choice. Julian had been her shield, running interference and clearing obstacles, but he had insisted the fight be hers to win. He gave her the power, but she had to learn how to wield it. And she had. She had learned to speak the language of ROI and brand identity, translating her vision of empathy into terms they could understand. The Washington Initiative, as it was now called, was a success, not just aesthetically, but commercially. The lounges were becoming a reason to fly the airline. "Have you heard from her?" Maya asked quietly. Julian knew who she meant. "Eleanor Vance. Our legal team informed me she completed the mandatory year-long course in racial equity and management ethics. It was a condition of her settlement. She works for a non-profit hospitality training group now, teaching young managers how not to make the mistakes she did." He paused. "People can learn. Sometimes it just takes a spectacular fall to make them look up." A young woman approached them, the new lounge manager. Her uniform was a simple, elegant, dark blue dress, designed by a local fashion student. Her smile was open and genuine. "Ms. Washington, Mr. Croft. Welcome. Your flight to Chicago boards in 40 minutes. Can I bring you a coffee? We have a new blend from a roaster in Silver Lake." "Thank you, Maria. I'd love one," Maya said, her own smile effortless. As Maria walked away, Maya looked at her reflection in the polished marble. She saw a woman she was still getting to know, a woman who had stood in this exact spot a year ago and felt her world end. The fear was gone, the humiliation a distant echo. In its place was a quiet, unshakable sense of belonging. Not because she had been given access, but because she had built the room herself. The boarding pass in her bag was still a key, but she now understood its true purpose. It wasn't just to unlock a door for herself. It was to hold it open for others.